for the most part, we're just getting a big fly deep and on a short leader, generally on a sinking line, and the strikes are hard. Like there's no nibbles; they're smashing it.
Welcome to the Destination Angler Podcast, the podcast for anglers who travel. And I'm your host, Steve Haigh. We go right to the source, the local guides and experts, to build your knowledge of top fishing locations around North America. It's a big world out there. Now go and fish it.
I'm going away for a while, but I'll be back soon. Whoa, whoa.
Today, our destination is Red Rock, Ontario, and the world-famous Nipigon River. And our guest, Gord Ellis, is here to tell us about those monster brook trout as big as your leg that the Nipigon is famous for. Gord is an award-winning columnist, an outdoor writer, speaker, conservationist, hunter, and fishing guide. He's senior editor of Ontario Outdoors magazine, which I'm told is Canada's most well-read outdoor publication. And you may be familiar with his column, Open Range, which has been appearing in the print version of Ontario Out of Doors for close to a decade. Every Thursday, you can hear Gord on CBC Radio's Outdoor Report, and he has a column in the local Thunder Bay newspaper called Sporting Life. He is also the Canadian travel writer for North American Fishermen and writes regular columns for Minnesota Outdoor News and Minnesota Wild. He's been writing newspaper and magazine columns for nearly 35 years and fishing all his life. And he has won over 20 writing awards through the Outdoor Writers of Canada. And there's more. In 2018, Gord was inducted into the Freshwater Fishing Hall of Fame, which is in, can you guess, Hayward, Wisconsin, for his writing, education, and seminars and his work with kids. And he also guides for Nipigon River Adventures and the Quebec Lodge. And did I mention he's one heck of a nice guy, too. So if you're looking for your personal best on a brook trout, there's no better place to be than the Nipigon River in the bow of Gord's boat. Gord, welcome to the show.
Hi there, Steve.
Glad to have you. So you're a busy guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell us where is Red Rock, Ontario?
Well, Red Rock is basically right at the very top of Lake Superior. So Lake Superior, the greatest of the Great Lakes. And if you go up on the map and you just trace your finger right to the very top of Lake Superior, that area is a place called Nipigon Bay, and Red Rock is a small community on Nipigon Bay. There's also a community nearby called Nipigon, and Nipigon is where the Nipigon River comes in. But Red Rock is literally, maybe 10 miles from Nipigon. So the communities are very close together, and Red Rock is where Quebec Lodge is situated, which is the lodge that I guide out.
Very good. Yeah. Well, I first heard about this area. There was an article in the Toledo Blade where my mom still lives. My 85-year-old mother, she sent me the article, and I made a mental note of that to get up there someday and check it out. So I'm really glad we're talking today. Give us a picture of the fishing opportunities there in your area. So the area is most famous for those monster brook trout, correct?
Yes. Yeah, it is. And in fact, the world record brook trout, which still stands to this day, was caught in 1915 in the Nipigon River.
Wow.
So a long time ago. Yeah. And it still holds. So the fish was 14.5 pounds, 31.5 inches, about 20 inches around. It was an absolute giant. Even then, it was considered a giant. In fact, when it was caught, there was enough doubt about it being an actual brook trout that it was sent away to Ottawa, which is the capital of Canada, to be checked, to be verified as a brook trout, which it was. And that record stands to this day. It's one of the oldest standing world records. And it's going to be hard to break it. That was a big brook trout.
That's a big, I've never heard of a 31.5-inch brook trout before. Yeah. So that's giant. Incredible. And that was in the Nipigon River, right?
That was in the Nipigon River. Yeah, it was. In those days, there was no dams on the Nipigon River, and so what would happen is people would put in way up on Lake Nipigon, which is the headwaters, and these big freighter canoes would go down over the course of several days and fish the river. And the guy who actually caught the fish was named Dr. J. Cook, who lived in what was then Fort William. It's now Thunder Bay, where I live, which is about an hour from Nipigon. Anyway, he was a doctor, and he caught the fish. Actually, he was using a fly rod, but he actually used a live minnow, and put it on the hook. A minnow called a sculpin,
Okay.
which is a very common bait fish in the Nipigon River. Anyway, he caught this. It was the fly rod's still around, actually. It's in the Nipigon Museum, and it's a bamboo rod. So you can imagine the fight on I think it was like a 5-weight bamboo fly rod. And it caught this enormous fish on catgut line too, by the way.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, all that stuff, and that stuff's still around. The rod's still in the Nipigon Library. But anyway, that record is held to this day, and the river's been through all sorts of changes. There's 3 dams on it now, and a lot of the white water that initially was there is gone, but it's still a phenomenal brook trout fishery to this day. Through a lot of ups and downs.
Yeah, right. And you've got steelhead in there? Weren't you out steelhead fishing this week?
Yeah. So the fishery, it's pretty diverse fishery in this part of the world, and it's really diverse around Nipigon. So you have Lake Superior, which is the Great Lakes. So in Lake Superior, potentially, there's brook trout, which we call coaster brook trout in Lake Superior, steelhead, lake trout. We have Chinook salmon, we have coho salmon, we have pink salmon, we have walleye, northern pike. Occasionally get a brown trout. They're not common, but occasionally we get one.
Yeah.
And those are the primary species, and then there's perch and some other things. So in the lower part of the Nipigon River, you can potentially catch any one of those species. And lots of times when I'm out guiding, and I'll be guiding for brook trout, you'll incidentally catch a Chinook salmon, or you'll catch a steelhead, a lake trout. You just never know what you're going to catch. When you get into the upper section of the river, you're more into a traditional sort of native fishery, and that's lake trout, brook trout, and pike. Those are the big 3.
Okay, so there's a big difference kind of between the upper and the lower then.
Yeah. It's a lot more of a diverse fishery in the lower end of the river, and then out into Lake Superior. But it's a lot of fun, and you can still get some of my very biggest fish have actually come from the lower section of the river.
Okay. And are you typically fly fishing, or are you mixing it up a little bit?
Yeah, I do both. I do love fly fishing. It is really big water. It's heavy water, and so you're using heavy gear. You're generally using an 8-weight rod. Some get away with a 6 or 7. I find that a bit light myself, just because of the Nipigon River. For people who might not know about it, it's a huge river. It's the largest tributary into Lake Superior, and it is an enormous river. It's big. Like, I run a big boat on it. It's a powerful, deep, swift river. So the fish are generally close to the bottom. Sometimes they're close to shore, but there's almost always a pretty good current, and you have to get your fly down. So you're using sink tip or full sink lines.
Okay.
Weighted flies. It's what I refer to as chuck and duck a lot of times. You're
yeah, right.
Throwing heavy gear.
Sure.
So there's some spinning done too, but I do love fly fishing for those big brookies. That's for sure.
Okay. Oh, that sounds like a lot of fun. Tell me what's it like to hook into one of these big brookies? Like, how big do these guys really get?
Well, so when folks come up and fish with me, one of the first questions I ask them, is what's the biggest brook trout you've caught? What's your personal best brook trout? And the typical answer is like 13, 14, 15 inches, which almost anywhere in the world where brook trout are, that's a good fish. Like, that's a big one, right?
It is.
On the Nipigon River, it's pretty rare to get one that's like 15 inches. They're almost all over. Like, your average fish would be 18, 19 inches.
Okay.
Like, it's not that they aren't there. The small fish are there somewhere. I mean, a lot of it has to do with what we're throwing at them. We're throwing big flies and that kind of stuff. So you're not getting smaller fish, but you don't really even see them that much. Like, they're hiding. I don't know. They stay away from where the big brook trout are. And because we're focused on catching the big ones, you don't catch very many small ones at all.
Yeah.
So almost always whoever comes up gets their personal best brook trout, like I'd say 95% of the time.
Uh-huh.
There's occasionally somebody who says, well, I've been to Labrador and I caught an 8-pounder there. And, an 8-pounder is a big brook trout, right? Like, that's a tough bar to get over, even on the Nipigon. But for most people, they get their biggest brook trout of their life.
Okay. So 18, 19 inches. I think you told me before the show started that you even get some up into the mid-20s.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So just to give you a little bit of an idea of the kind of fish that we're dealing with, the regulation on the Nipigon system, and this includes Lake Superior, Nipigon River, and Lake Nipigon, and all the tributaries running into Lake Superior, the fish has to be 22 inches or over to keep, and it's a limit of 1. So a 22-inch brook trout is about 5 pounds.
Jeez.
I mean, it varies. It can be a little smaller, it can be a little bigger, but it's a really big trout. And the reason that it's that size was picked is because a 22-inch brook trout in this part of the world where they grow big has spawned 3 times. So if you're going to kill one, if somebody wants to kill one, I don't kill them, and my boat's a no-kill boat. But if somebody wants to take a fish and mount it or whatever, it has to be over 22 inches. And,
okay,
like in a trip, it's pretty rare that somebody doesn't get one that's in that area,
Yeah.
in the 22-inch area. And a lot of people get them over that, last year I had 3 fish that were over 25 inches. So it's like 25 and a half inches.
Sounds like fun.
That's a 7-8 pound, maybe 9 pound brook trout. They're pretty
that's
big.
A big one.
Yeah.
I've never even seen anything that big. That sounds like a very large fish.
It's really large, and a lot of people, when they first hook these ones, they don't actually believe it's a brook trout until they see it because it's too big. Like they think they've got a lake trout or it's a brown, or they just can't wrap their head around what they're feeling. It can't be a brookie. It's just too bloody big. And then they come up and they see this enormous brook trout. They go, what the heck's going on?
That is fun. Well, what kind of a fight does a 25-inch brook trout put up?
Well, they're pretty good fighters. I mean, they're not jumpers. They're more. It's more of a dogged fight, but they can rip off a lot of line, and they can be heartbreakers too. Like I see a lot of fish. I see a lot of fish broken off because they'll sort of like play dumb at first, and the guy's bringing them in, maybe horsing them a bit too much.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, like this fish decides, there's a lot of current in the Nipigon River. It's a big, big river. And these fish will all of a sudden just do a blast into the current, and then that tippet goes, So I always try to tell people, don't horse these fish. Like, let's take our time, because you're horsing, not only are you horsing a big fish, but you're fighting heavy current.
Yeah.
And I'm in a boat, and I'll go downstream with the fish generally, and then we'll net it or whatever. But it can be a little tricky sometimes getting those big ones, especially if they get into faster water. But they're not like an Atlantic salmon or a rainbow where they're out of the water as much as in. They're not really jumpers. Like it's more of a determined fight, but they're exciting. Like your adrenaline will go. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll bet. Yeah, any 25 inches and into my line, that'll get my adrenaline going. That's for sure.
Especially when you get your first look at it, and then that's when the adrenaline really goes. When you see this enormous fish.
Oh my gosh. What kind of tippets are you using?
Well, it depends. So generally, I try to fish with as heavy as I can get away with, and I'm just going to tell you the pound test because that's what I go by. I generally run about a 10-pound test tippet.
Oh wow. Okay.
And again, just so people know, usually we're running subsurface lures or flies like muddlers or donkers or lots of cone heads, sex dungeons, these kind of like very furry, big flies. They're quite large, and generally weighted. So you don't have to have a big, long leader. The fish aren't line shy. They're not really that line shy because the water's heavy and things are moving quick. So they just come up and smash this thing. Yeah. So I run a pretty heavy leader, and when people run lighter ones, they tend to get broken off a fair bit. So
yeah, not a good idea.
Yeah, you want to try to run the heaviest leader you can get away with, and it doesn't have to be really long. There's occasional times we'll go lighter, especially, for instance, sometimes we do have fish coming up on the surface, and then you might use a stimulator or something, and then you'll want to go with a lighter tippet, obviously. But
okay,
for the most part, we're just getting a big fly deep and on a short leader, generally on a sinking line, and the strikes are hard. Like there's no nibbles; they're smashing it.
That's great. So there is some dry fly fishing opportunities?
Yeah, I would say in July, there's a really massive caddis hatch. And even the big brookies will come up for the caddis. Like even though caddis are dinky little flies, there's so many of them that you'll start seeing. Like one of the biggest trout I ever caught on a dry fly, which was like a 8-pounder, came during the caddis hatch, and I could see it feeding. I could tell it was a big fish, and I didn't try to match the hatch at all. I threw a great big, I think it was like a number 4 or number 6 stimulator over there, and this thing came up and ate it. But it had been feeding on caddis, and it was just like gorging itself on caddis.
Yeah.
So that's a big hatch. And then there's also there's some big stones that come up a little earlier in the season, and then you'll see hexagenia and some other pretty good. Everything's big. Like the other thing about the Nipigon, like the stone flies are like bats. They're the biggest stone flies you'll ever see. They're gigantic.
Yeah.
And so everything is oversized. The only thing that's small is the caddis. The caddis are pretty small, but everything else, all the other aquatic, all the other hatches are generally, like big mayflies, stones, all those things. They're big.
Wow. God, the land of big.
It is the land, like it is the land of big, like for everything, everything. They're on the
river.
Big side. Yeah, the river's big. The fish are big.
The river, the rods, the fish. Everything. I'd love to hear a little bit of your story, Gord. So I'd love to hear about your background, how you ended up in the area. And I heard you actually got talked into guiding.
Yeah. So as far as the area, I grew up here. I've lived here pretty much my whole life. My folks came here in the 60s, and my dad was a teacher here. And we were raised in Thunder Bay. And I've always been a fisherman my whole life. Like my earliest memories are fishing, and I was fascinated with brook trout early on, and fished actually a little creek that's no more than 10 minutes from where I'm sitting right now. I grew up fishing on, and sort of cut my teeth. Yeah, it's sort of cool. But I've always been fascinated with brook trout, and then when I got into my teens, I started realizing that the world's greatest brook trout fishery was like an hour from my house. And it took me a while to fish it. I didn't really, because it was so big, and it's a big intimidating river. Like you don't even know where to start when you first look at it. So it took me a while to sort of start fishing it. And I fished it with a friend who introduced me to fishing on it. I was probably in my early 20s.
Yeah.
And I fell in love with it. But then one of the interesting parts of the story is that then the Nipigon River was a pretty depressed place. The fishing wasn't good. It had been allowed. The fishery had been allowed to degrade for various reasons. So the fishing was nothing like it is now. But anyway, I just spent more and more time on the river, getting to know it, fishing all different sections of it, and it's my favorite place to be. And now guiding, I spend, between 50 and 75 days a year on the water somewhere there. And I never get tired of it. Like that's, I am fascinated by it. And so there is a lot of water. Like there's a lot of water between Lake Superior and the Nipigon River and Lake Nipigon. It's just mind-boggling how much water there is to fish.
Endless.
It's pretty close.
Yeah.
Like I won't fish it all in my lifetime.
Yeah.
At all. I've been lucky to fish a lot of it, but there's a lot of stuff that I'll never get to, and that's just on that system. So, and as far as the guiding, Ray Rivard, who owns Quebec Lodge and Nipigon River Adventures, it's his company. I would bump into him at sports shows because I primarily my career has been a journalist, broadcaster, and writer,
mm-hmm.
and fishing related largely, but not all. I do other things as well. But Ray knew I loved fishing brook trout. He knew I knew a lot about the Nipigon River, and every time I'd see him, he'd say, "Hey, you should try guiding." And I'll be honest, I had no interest in guiding. I did not want to be a guide.
Huh.
It had no appeal to me. I was fishing tournaments, and I was, doing fly-ins, and I did a lot more traveling, and I just had no interest in guiding. So anyway, he finally, Ray's a very persuasive guy if you ever meet him. And he finally talked me into trying it. And I took up a couple different people, actually 2 couples and another angler.
Okay.
And I really enjoyed myself. And the thing that, Steve, the funny thing about it was the fishing was part of it, but the other thing that I really enjoyed was introducing people to a part of the world that I really love. And I wanted to tell them why it was special and show them why it was special and tell them the story of it. And that's, I think, what sort of hooked me on guiding, is being able to be excited to see somebody else be so excited about, catching a giant brook trout or seeing one of the things that's maybe underplayed is just how beautiful the area is. It's absolutely spectacularly beautiful and rugged. So, people see things that they wouldn't maybe necessarily see. It's a really incredible part of the world.
Yeah.
Bald eagles and, it's all this really cool stuff, plus amazing fishing. So, yeah, I started really enjoying it. And I think this is year 7 now that I'm guiding, which is
there you
kind
go.
of crazy. But yeah, I look forward to it. I look forward to it every year now.
Right. When does the guiding season pick up? Yeah. Except for right now.
This year's a little different.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to talk about that. But when does the guiding season start up there for you?
So normally next weekend I would be starting. Generally it's mid-May, and mid-May is I would focus on pike. We have phenomenal pike fishing here, and I'm talking trophy big pike, and you can catch them on a fly, which is nuts because they're in like 2 feet of water, and hitting 40-inch pike is no problem. Like we have lots.
How
of
big?
Them. And
40?
40, and the biggest one last year that I caught myself was 47 inches, which
wow.
is a pretty big pike.
That's an alligator.
It was an alligator. It was an alligator. And I didn't even have a net. I had to hand land the stupid thing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was pretty exciting too. But so I generally start doing that with a little trout mixed in, some brook trout and rainbows as well. We have good rainbow fishing here as well, steelhead. And then as you get into June, then starts focusing on brook trout, more and more brook trout fishermen. And pretty much for the rest of the season, right until early September. The season on the Nipigon River ends on Labor Day, but on Lake Nipigon, it ends on September 15th. So I guide right to September 15th. So my season starts May 15th and it ends September 15th. So it's about 4 months long.
Okay. Always something to fish for. That's fantastic.
Yeah, there is. Yeah.
And about half your clients are from the U.S. What's the split there? U.S., Canada, other places?
It depends. I would say, for instance, looking at last year, it was probably about 70% were from the United States. The year before was a little less than that. It varies. Some years it's 80%. It really just depends on a few different things. Like, where Ray does a lot of shows, and so he'll get bookings from new places. And I think the folks that came up from Toledo that time, Ray had met at a show. But I would say probably 60 to 70% on average, something like that.
Okay. And I looked at your website before the show, and that lodge looks really, really fantastic. I read it was built in 1937 for a bunch of paper mill executives. Looks really rustic. Yeah,
it was. The only reason the lodge was built is for parties and for smoking cigars and drinking whiskey and having a really good time, which is a cool thing because it is a really nice place. I mean, it looks like a hunting and fishing lodge, but that's not really what it was initially designed for. It was initially for having a lot of really, really good parties and eating a lot of really good food.
Yeah.
I mean, in the bathrooms, it's hilarious. You go in the bathrooms and the bathrooms are really cool because they're all like the tile from the 30s and everything, but they actually have cigar holders in them. You don't see that every day, right?
Yeah.
But back in the day, like while you're shaving, you're obviously smoking a cigar.
You're smoking a cigar.
So it's a cool place, and it literally has $1 million view of Nipigon Bay. I mean, it is spectacular. Every morning you wake up, have a cup of coffee, and I go sit on the deck and I look at Lake Superior and Nipigon Bay, and it's a breathtaking view.
Yeah,
just a perfect way to start your day.
Yeah.
And then you go fishing on the Nipigon River. So, every day is usually a pretty good day.
Yeah. Doing a pinch there. Sounds pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
So here we are, early May, just as the world seems poised to come out of this shelter-in-place thing. How is the coronavirus affecting you and your business?
Well, right now, as it stands, May is a write-off. I mean, we don't have anybody. Pretty much everybody was coming up from the States in May, and And so the border's closed at this point right now. And we don't know when it will open. Hopefully it'll open in June, but we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And besides that, we have restrictions here in Ontario. Like there's restrictions everywhere about social distancing and what is open. Like a lot of places aren't open right now. A lot of things are closed. And so it's had a huge impact. It'll have a huge impact on May. I guess the question is, will it have a huge impact on June and July? And nobody knows. Like nobody. If the politicians might know here in Ontario, but even they, I think, are just going day by day because of,
Yeah, who knows?
But here we do seem like the term flattening the curve does seem to be underway here.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've had pretty restrictive. I haven't been out of my house too much except to go fishing and go get groceries. So, and I'm,
good for you.
And there hasn't been a lot of, and that's just what everybody's been. People have been staying home, and I'm, working from home right now.
Yeah,
that's just, and so hopefully that will pay off. But we don't know. Nobody knows.
Yeah, right. Are you taking bookings for later in the year?
Yeah. I mean, Ray is. In fact, I talked with Ray yesterday, and I think he is still taking bookings. Actually,
okay.
One of the interesting thing is he hasn't had a lot of cancellations, and we didn't even have cancellations for May until fairly recently, when it was obvious that the border wasn't going to open. They announced they were going to close the border till May 31st. Well, if you were, coming from Minnesota for May 15th and the border's not open till May 31st, you're not coming, right?
Yeah, not happening.
Yeah, I mean, people still want to come up. It's just
right.
what the rules will be, and really, it's a day-to-day thing right now.
Okay. Well, yeah, for all you listeners out there, we're asking the guides on the show about the coronavirus, but please check back because, the situations can improve and change quickly. So, don't think that that these guys are closed for the rest of the summer. Certainly things could change and you could get up there and get in the front of Gord's boat and go after some brook trout. So please check back. So what we're doing here at the Destination Angler Podcast is we've started a GoFundMe site called Help Fishing Guides Survive Coronavirus. And what we're trying to do is raise money for guides who need the help and understand that it's a difficult and uncertain time for people, and that, there's lots of people who are in need right now. But if you are in a position to support, and if you love fishing, we'd just be extremely grateful to receive your help. So, yeah, thanks for talking about that, Gord. So we started to kind of go through the seasons a little bit, and I'd love to just kind of do a double click on that a little bit and give me some ideas of, what are you doing in May, June, July? How do the techniques vary? Where are the fish? What are they doing that's different season to season here?
Well, one thing to note is that it's pretty cool up here through most of the summer. Like it can be actually, the weather can be very nice, but I guess what I'm saying is the water stays quite cold.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have a good cold water fishing through the summer. But May and June, like I mentioned, May is pike starting about mid-May. Steelhead are running now. And I do take some people out for fly fishing for steelhead in May, and it's pretty fun.
Oh, good!
Like we have some beautiful tributary streams that aren't very far from Quebec Lodge. That and the amount of pressure is very low. Like it's amazing how few people fish these smaller rivers, especially later in May. Right now they're a little busier, but I mean, compared to some of the pressure I see in pictures in other places, there's no pressure,
Nice.
And then as you get into June, the brook trout fishing starts to pick up. Water's still cold, but the brookies start getting a little more active. And then you can also fish for big lake trout, which is another, it's not so much a fly fishing thing, it's more of a trolling or casting thing, but there's some really good lake trout to be caught. You can catch them on flies every year, get some big fish on big lake trout on flies, but it's more of a incidental thing. They tend to be a little bit deeper.
Okay.
So June is good brook trout fishing, and actually right into July it stays quite good for brookies.
Nice.
Water never really warms up so much that it's super tough. Some years you'll get like a super hot year and you'll get a hot week, and the surface temperature, it'll get into like 67, 68, and it's tough fishing. But that's really rare. That's the exception. Normally, like last year, I think the warmest water I saw in the season was like 63 or 64. And I think I told you before we did the interview about, last year in July, I was doing a show, filming a show with Lund Ultimate Fishing. And we were on Lake Nipigon in, I think, July 5th or something. And the water was in the 40 Fahrenheit, like the low 40 Fahrenheit. It hurt to the hand. And that was in July, right?
Yeah.
So you can get some really cold water, and brook trout like cold water. They're active in cold water. So whenever you have cold water, through the season, that's a good thing for brook trout fishing. And then as you get into August, brook trout are fall spawners, so they start coloring up, and they start really taking on those big, the reds and the oranges, and they just spectacularly color up, and their nose, the types get a little more curved, and they start getting a little more humpbacks, and they just look really funky. And they get a little more aggressive. And a lot of the bigger fish, I find, tend to be caught later in the season, like August and into September, because you get these big males and stuff to get really aggressive.
Right.
And that's my favorite time to fish. If I was, people say, when's your favorite time? I would say August is my favorite time to fish for brook trout. Also, the weather's great, and there's very few bugs. We do have bugs up here, Steve. That's one, one of the things that every once in a while people forget, and they come up and, they'll come get out of their truck, and, they have like cutoffs on or whatever.
Yeah, nope.
Short sleeve shirts. And then the next thing you know, like they're just being swarmed. It's just like a buffet.
Yeah.
So we do have bugs, and especially in June, the bugs can be they're not bad on the water. Like once you're on the water, it's fine. It's just getting to the water and then getting out of the water into the truck. That's when they'll get you. But I usually take the brunt of it. I put the guests in the truck, and I, do the boat and everything, and just I take the hit.
Yeah, right. Now, is there? Does DEET work on these guys, or do you have to do something else?
Yeah. You can wear bug dope, and and actually, I'll wear one of those goofy looking bug hats if I have to. But
right.
That's part of the deal. But in August, bugs aren't a factor. So if you don't like bugs, that's a good time to come.
Good. Where it's hot and difficult fishing, maybe in some other parts of the world, you've got some of the best fishing in the middle of the summer, in August and September. Yeah,
without a doubt.
If you're one of those guys that, is hitting Montana in June, and you're looking for something to do in August, maybe the Nipigon River is a good spot for you.
Even July, it's amazing how good the fishing can be in July, but certainly August is a fantastic time.
Yeah. Yeah. And about those bugs, I remember the first time I experienced that. I was in college, and we drove up to Nakina, Canada, and flew out of Nakina.
Oh yeah.
And I remember walking through town in, I think it was June, and there were people with scarves on, and, we experienced pretty quickly why, those black flies were getting our ears and our nose and everything. So a can of DEET was pretty helpful.
Yeah, Nakina's known for having a few black flies.
Oh, are they? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it was a 16-hour drive for a bunch of college kids back in the 70s, getting there from Toledo. So tell me about these brook trout, a little bit more about the brook trout. How selective are they?
Well, they can be. They can be quite selective some days. A lot of the times they're like, in the Nipigon system, they do eat insects, but they're primarily looking for meat. They like there's smelt in the system, so they eat a lot of smelt.
Okay.
They eat these things called sculpin that look sort of almost like I don't know how to describe it, almost like a bullhead in some ways, but they sit right on the bottom. There's kind of squashed heads, very flat looking thing.
Mm-hmm.
They like those. But they will, they'll eat anything. They'll eat leeches, and they'll eat stoneflies and stuff. So there are times that they are selective. In the springtime, in June especially, there's a lot of smelt die-offs, and so like they're gorging on smelt. So all the flies tend to be like white or silver. And anything that looks like a sort of a silvery minnow is generally a good pattern. There's all sorts of different ones that we use. And they will be quite selective about that. They'll want something that looks like a smelt, and if you're not giving them that, then they'll reject it.
Okay.
So as the season wears on, that changes. Like last year, I noticed as we got into August, black seemed to be coming on, and all the bigger fish were being caught on black. But then before that, everything had been white. So when literally like flipped from white to black, in a matter of a week, and that was just because they were completely focused on eating smelt for the first part of the season.
Yeah. Well, and you got to get them deep too. You said you're using sink tips, sinking lines.
Yeah, generally they're deeper. I mean, it's not super deep, but there's parts of the river that are, 10, 12, 13 feet deep. And so, you just to get down there, they generally tend to be closer to the bottom because that's where the least amount of current is. So to get down, they will come up for it, but the less work that they have to do, the better,
Right.
Brook trout are in many ways a lazy fish. Like they don't want to move too much, especially the big ones. So if they have to exert too much energy to go up and get your fly, they'll just let it go by. But if you put it right down in their face or, 2 feet above them, you have a far better chance of getting bit. So that's where the full sink and the sink tip and the heavier flies really, really pay off because you can get down in the strike zone.
Yeah. Well, that's how they got big, being smart and lazy.
Yeah.
Right. So you've had some really interesting people in your boat through the years, right? I think you told me a story about a guy with the last name of Neeson. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah. So last year I had these two guys from Ireland. They were great, both great guys, great anglers. And one of them was named Peter Neeson and a super excellent angler, great guy. We were chatting, day 5, his buddy said, "Oh, by the way, just so you know, Peter's cousin is Liam."
Wow.
Liam Neeson. And it turns out Liam Neeson is also, Liam Neeson's like super famous actor, right?
Right.
And it turns out he's a big time fly fisherman. And I guess he did a whole series on the greatest Atlantic salmon fishing places in the world and stuff. So we had a good chat about that. But these guys, the other gentleman was named Charles Hendren. They were both really, really good anglers from Ireland who came specifically to the Nipigon River to catch Nipigon River brook trout because they're that famous, So that was cool. And about 4 or 5 years ago, we had Babe Winkleman up, who's, pretty well known. And and I'd actually met Babe Winkleman 30 years before, but he came up to the lodge and was shooting a show. And it was kind of fun. I didn't actually guide him, but I ended up jamming with him. He's a really good guitar player, interestingly enough.
Oh, that's great.
So and I play guitar, so we were jamming, and he was telling some stories, and that was cool. And we've had Linder Media has been up, and Dan Linder did a show up here, and they're great. They're great anglers and fished all over the world. Great people too.
Do those guys fly fish, or is it just a Lindy rig when they're up there?
They're mostly gear fishing, spin fishing.
Okay.
Not that they can't fly fish, and most of them can, but a lot of the television shows, if they're not completely focused on fly fishing, they're the other way, right? They're spin fishing. There's not a lot of shows sort of cross over. Like last year, I did a show called The New Fly Fisherman, which is a fantastic show, and I did it with a guy named Bill Spicer, who's an amazing angler.
Yeah.
And that's just a fly fishing show. Like it's just fly fishing, and they go all over the place fly fishing, which is fantastic. Like good gig, right?
Yeah, I gotta say, my next job.
Bill Spicer's been to all the places I want to go to. I've been to some of them, but they've been up to Labrador, 3 or 4 times, and he had some great stories. So
yeah, that sounds like fun.
Yeah, so you get to meet you meet a lot of great anglers too, like anglers that have gone to Siberia, and that's really cool to meet really experienced, amazing anglers who fished all over the world.
Yeah, and they're coming to you.
Yeah, and that's a really cool thing. It's really cool to watch somebody in the front of your boat who really knows how to throw a line and can adapt and has some, might have some different techniques that you might not think about and say, oh, this reminds me of fishing in Scotland or whatever. And they'll put something on and catch a brook trout, or catch a rainbow. So that's a fun part of guiding too.
Do you get many beginners?
Yeah, actually, last year I had a guy who had never fished before, ever. and he was in his 60s. He had literally never held a fishing rod. So we went from him never holding a fishing rod to him getting about a 5-pound brook trout in the course of a day. Did
he have any idea how lucky he was? I mean, did it sink in?
No, I don't think he. Honestly, I really don't think he did.
Yeah.
He, we started just with the basic, and he was spin fishing, by the way.
Okay.
Here's how you open the bail or whatever. And to teaching him how to cast, and then okay, a little bit farther and a little bit farther. And I've had some pretty green fly fishermen in the boats too. Like people who've just bought brand, like you can tell right away, right? Everything is like brand new. There's no stains on it, and like there's, all the. You can tell somebody's just like got the like the vest is looks like it just came out of the dry cleaners, right?
Yeah.
And so generally I spend the first day with those people, like teaching them how to roll cast, teaching them,
Okay.
a few knots,
some basics.
And I have no problem doing that. It's part of the job.
I mean, this is a river where, I mean, sure, you could drag your boat up there and put that boat in there, but I mean, this is a river where fishing with a guide it's almost a necessity, I would think, with the size of the water and what's going on. And
yeah, the learning curve is way shorter with a guide. I mean, it just is, and there are people who will come up and fish 2 or 3. It's also, there's a lot of sort of dangerous water on the system.
Okay.
And I'm really very, very careful on the system, but every year I see somebody smash their lower unit, or run a rapid they shouldn't run. And you're taking a big risk doing that, like it's not cut and dried water. Let's put it that. And it's also, it goes up and down with water levels. So one day an area that you're driving over is totally fine. And the next day you're driving over it and you hit your lower unit because the water's dropped 4 feet.
Yeah. There are 3 or 4 dams on the river?
There's 3 dams, 3 hydroelectric dams. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So do you have to kind of check in with the government source that runs those dams to figure out what the water is going to do that day?
Yeah, you can do that. They keep them pretty stable now. There was a time they yo-yoed them a lot. Water went up and down a lot. They're more stable now, but they still do fluctuate. And there's certain sections of the river they'll actually just like a warning horn when they're going to let water out.
Okay.
And that's a sign that you might want to get out of there because the water is going to go up substantially, And
even in a boat?
Even in a boat, it can be a little bit of a scary thing. Like when the water starts like really going up and it speeds up, right?
Yeah.
Some of the rapids that aren't so bad suddenly get a little bit scary,
Okay.
So you just have to be careful and having a guide certainly, removes some of that because we know the water, right?
Right. Yeah. And you were telling me before the show that, one of the things that you're concentrating on is just holding the boat in current so people can fish, right?
That's right. Yeah. That's a big part of my job is boat control. It's a huge part of my job and I'm good at it. I've been doing it forever.
Yeah.
But the currents change literally every day. The currents change. So just being able to know how to hold the boat in position and to be able to fish a certain lie and stuff. Because it is 90% boat fishing. I mean, we do occasionally get out and pull up on some rocks and stuff and fly cast or shore, but mostly you're in a boat.
You're in a boat. Okay. Well, just shifting gears for a minute, you had talked about how the river was just a shadow of itself, years ago, when you were younger, maybe as a kid. What took place, and you had a part in that too, right? This renaissance that's happened with the Nipigon River.
So what happened over time was the dams went in, and they had an impact on the river in all sorts of different ways. A lot of the rapids and stuff were drowned. There was still brook trout. They can still survive. I mean, they can live in reservoirs and they can live in, it doesn't have to be all rapids, but it did change the river. They did huge log drives down the Nipigon River for decades. And I mean, I can even remember in the 70s, the log drives on the Nipigon River. And I'm talking massive log drives where like the river was covered in logs.
Wow.
And that went on for decades. And so all those, there's logs all over the bottom of the river. And then there was like tons of bark and like, it couldn't have been good for the river to have all these logs like ripping down the river all the time. Right.
Right.
Like the spawning beds were all chewed up and, so that was happening. And then the limits were extremely high for everything, not just brook trout, but, and there was no catch and release ethic really. Like, catch and release is really a pretty fairly new thing.
Right.
Compared to a lot of stuff. But when I started fishing there, nobody let any brook trout go. They all got killed, as did everything else. And I'm talking about in the 70s, right? It wasn't really until the 80s that people started talking about letting fish go, at least in this part of the world. And so that had a huge impact because everything was harvest, and there was derbies, and I can remember literally going to a derby in the early 80s, and a guy coming in and like dumping a cooler full of brook trout out, all dead, of course, for the Derby, right?
Oh my gosh.
And I know it sounds unbelievable now, but then that was just business as usual. I mean, it was just dead fish lined up as far as the eye could see. And this, of course, doesn't do any good for a fishery. And then there was the problem with the dams with the yo-yoing, and there was exposing spawning beds and creating an erosion and all this other stuff. And so in the late 80s, a biologist by the name of Rob Swainson came to Nipigon from Southern Ontario. He was a brook trout specialist. And Rob knew about the history of the Nipigon River, and he got there and he could not believe what a shadow of the historical river it was. Like, the fishery was terrible, the river was a mess, the regs were, they weren't of the time, they were too generous, and there wasn't the fish to support it. So he spent a lot of time trying to figure out ways to make things better, and he got people on board, and I got to know Rob, and I was, writing a lot then, even more than I write now, and doing a lot of columns and stuff. And we started doing a lot of publicity, and he would give me information talking about the river and what needed to be done. And then there was a committee struck that the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry up here struck to look at the brook trout, not only of Nipigon, but right across this part of the world, northwestern Ontario. And what came out of it was some regulations that were quite a bit stricter, but would be, conserve this fish that's, so rare, really. I mean, it's a trophy brook trout fishery you can drive to, which is a rare beast if you know anything about brook trout. Most of the places that have trophy trout, you got to get on a float plane and go a long, long ways north, and there's no roads around, and, it's quite a different scenario. So anyway, the long and short of it is, by the late 90s into the early 2000s, the regulations changed a lot. And especially in the last decade, the fishery has just rebounded. It's really incredible.
Yeah, I'll say.
And, there's lots of, the fishery's good. There's big fish around. There's lots to catch. Yeah. So it's a great story. It's a good news story,
I just love hearing that. Because think of what you've done, the joy you've put on so many people's hearts by the influence that you've had through your writing and your work with Rob. That's really great. I read your article in Ontario Out of Doors about fishing as a therapy from a couple years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And you said angling has been like a friend who listens well. What does fishing mean to you when you really get down to it?
Well, I mean, it's been a huge part of my life, and starting from a very young age, and it's given me a lot of really, really good friends. It gave me in a lot of ways a career,
mm-hmm.
and a great life. I've really had a great life. I feel like I've gotten a lot more out of fishing than I've given back to it, and I've tried to give back a lot. But
sure.
I just get so much joy out of it, and so much pleasure in doing it with people and showing people. And, I got to take my kids out, and, and some of our happiest memories were, going fishing, camping, whatever. It's just such a great activity.
Yeah.
And there's so many things about it that are just so good, anglers tend to be the people that want to conserve, and a lot of times they're the stewards of the resource. They know the water.
Mm-hmm.
They know the water. They know if the water's polluted, or if somebody's dumping crap in the river or something. There's erosion is impacting, or they know because they're there, right? They're on the water, and those are the people. Those are your eyes on the water, right? Anglers are your eyes on the water,
and hopefully they'll do something about it. Get organized.
Yeah, hopefully they do. I mean, not all anglers do, but
right.
A lot of them do. And I mean, here in Thunder Bay, we have a club called the North Shore Steelhead Association, it's all made up of anglers, and they do tons of cold water work for steelhead and for brook trout, and the core of the group is anglers, but they put money into positive things that impact. And there's groups like Trout Unlimited and Isaac Walton and all these groups that do important work to preserve fisheries.
You bet. Oh, that's great. Well, Gord, thanks so much for being on the show. How can our listeners get in touch with you and with your lodge?
Well, there's a couple of ways. I mean, the lodge website is NipigonRiverAdventures.com, and you can get a hold of Ray Rivard, who does the booking. Ray books me. I don't take bookings myself. Ray books me through the lodge because I stay at the lodge. So if you're fishing the lodge, I'm generally staying at the lodge at the same time.
Oh, fun.
Which is, it's kind of fun because you get to hang out with your clients. But
sure.
I do have a website. You can go to my website and send me a note if you want. I'm also on social media, Facebook and Instagram.
Okay.
But if you want to book a trip, you got to book it through the lodge, and that's Nipigon River Adventures. And I think I think the email is Ray at Nipigon River Adventures, so it's Ray Rivard.
Okay, very good. Well, listen, we'll post all this information on our show notes on our website, and we may even put some pictures up of some of the fishing up there on the Nipigon River. You feel free to email me with comments and suggestions at shaigh50@gmail.com. That's SHAIGH50@gmail.com. And please give us a share, a like, or follow on Facebook, and be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll see you again next week. It's a big world out there. Now go and fish it.
Well, I'll go from the land to the shining sea. But I know there's more to life than what the eye can see.